Hello and welcome. Ukrainian armed forces closed down the Black Sea for civilian shipping, and they will probably effectively succeed with it, while a peace conference is starting at Jeddah, where we can slowly get the impression that China wants to pressure Russia to end this war. This and more in this situational report. Close to the Crimean Bridge, there was an attack on a Russian tanker. We see it happening here. The tanker was identified as the SIG. The SIG is actually not a civilian ship, or I'm not sure, maybe some dual use or something, but it's used by the Russian military to transport fuel among it to the Russian forces in Syria and other things. So this was not a purely civilian ship that was randomly chosen. The Ukrainian side actually actively targeted this individual ship. The hit has done serious damage. We see pictures from the inside. This is the bridge. You see the outside here, roofs caving in, and this is the engine room, which clearly has flooded. So whether the ship will be saved or not is unclear as of now. We also have an interesting video here from the former, we have to say, Kakhovka Dam. It clearly shows how empty the reservoir is, and at the same time, how any hopes of the Ukrainian forces easily crossing this is probably deeply unfounded, as this is an area completely without any cover, and we can see the former dam here, where we can also see how far the water has dropped in this regard. Obviously, this is a completely open field, and we see right now what happens to Ukrainian forces if they cross open fields, even with some tree cover in the southern area in Orekhiv, if they do this with mechanized assaults, so that we can expect a serious Ukrainian crossing over the reservoir seems to be impossible. Let's go to the front line then. North of the Seversky Donetsk, we have reports of continuous Russian attacks. The Russian side claims successes here in the direction of Sinkivka, basically south of their current position, as well as west towards the Oskil. We see the Oskil here, which in big parts is still the eastern bank is still under Ukrainian control. There are claims of the Russian that they have reached it, that they have crossed the Oskil. There is still no proof whatsoever of this. So they might have had recent successes, but I cannot confirm them as of now. I didn't see any proof. We have further fighting here at Novosilivske. Russians are saying they captured it, this time for sure. Like, we know that they already claimed it a week ago, and then we had, for instance, Wargonzo saying that they attacked north of it to bypass Ukrainian fortifications in Novosilivske. This time they claim they captured it. I cannot fully confirm it, whether it has worked out or not. But this is the last claim. The Russian Ministry of Defense claimed that. Russian military bloggers claim it. I do not see a confirmation yet, though. We also have Russian reports of Ukrainian attacks on Novosilivske, on Novovodiane, which is somewhat south here. Where was it? Here. Novovodiane. This is the Sherebets bridgehead that the Russians captured in the last 2 or 3 weeks. The Ukrainians are counterattacking there, but I cannot confirm any successes of the Ukrainian counterattacks either. The Ukrainians also attacked in the direction of Karmasinivka, which is here. So basically they push into that bridgehead. Also reports of Ukrainian attacks in the Serebryanske forest here in the direction of Kremina. No change to be confirmed here as well. The Russians themselves attacked south of Debrova. Also no change confirmed overall. So we have the Russians claiming successes at Novosilivske and here northeast of Kupiansk. I cannot confirm either. They are possible, but it's not confirmed, and the Ukrainian attacks, by all measures, what I found, have failed. South of the Seversky Donetsk, we have fighting around Bilohorivka. Ukrainians attacked from Bilohorivka in the direction of Spirne and in Vesele. No confirmation of any successes here. The Russians say they have been successful in the southeastern part of Bilohorivka. This seems to be true, so they have likely pushed a little closer towards Bilohorivka. In Bakhmut itself, I do not see any proven change. Fighting is continuing at Orychovo, Vasilivka, Berchivka, Yahidne. We also have fighting at Klishivka, Andrivka and Kurdyumivka, but so far the Russians are saying they repulsed the attacks. I do not see any proof that would contradict the Russian claims. It seems likely that nothing overall has changed. Kurdyumivka is still the Ukrainians are on the outskirts of Kurdyumivka, but they very likely have not entered Kurdyumivka yet. The same with Andrivka. They are basically probably in visual distance of it, but not inside. Only in Klishivka, we have a little change. We have here the two majors, and they are saying that here the enemy advances 20 meters a day. In Klishivka, basically, I guess we should interpret it that basically every day they capture one more house to push forward. If you calculate the size of a lot house with some garden, it's probably 20 meters. So the Ukrainians slowly creep forward in Klishivka, according to this Russian source, but overall, no massive change. As said, 20 meters a day means that tomorrow they might be here and then they might be here. So overall, no real change at Bakhmut. Avdiivka, we have reports of Russian attacks around Avdiivka, Pervomaiske, Krasnohorivka and Marinka. No change whatsoever to be reported. At the oblast border here, between the two oblasts of Donetsk and of Zaporizhzhia, we have reports of smaller attacks by the Ukrainians. No change confirmed. The Russians did counterattack, and I do not see any proven change here in their control either. West of that at Orikhiv, it's the same. We have smaller reports about attacks. The Ukrainians are, according to the Russians, now and then attacking with small infantry groups, usually now, according to the Russians, without mechanized support. No change there. This is likely, if the Russians are true, then this is likely to draw out Russian artillery to then engage it in counter-battery fire, while the Russians have attacked at Novopokrovka, and they have not succeeded in pushing the Ukrainians back there either. West of it, occasional fighting around Piatikhatki, but no overall change in territory. But we do have some change over the Dnipro. The Ukrainians are still here on the bridgehead. They seem to have extended it further to the east. At least some Russian images of air attacks would implicate that. But this isn't the big news. The bigger news is that the Ukrainians have crossed the Konka River and are now closing in on Oleshki. I have video here of Ukrainian positions being shelled by the Russians, and this was geolocalized to here. So to go back to this side, we are roughly talking about this position, and the Ukrainians are now on the southern side. Now this is important, as while this is not yet the, let's call it, mainland, there's still a waterway in between. I've measured it here at randomly chosen point. Here it's 22 meters or 72 feet wide. There might be probably some smaller gaps, like this looks smaller, some other areas are wider. So this means it won't allow the Ukrainians yet to probably build up mechanized forces there, but they are creeping closer towards Orikhiv, and 20 meters is something that you can actually bridge in a surprise attack without the enemy's chance to react much to it. So the Ukrainians might be able to exploit that position further. We are far from a Ukrainian capture of Oleshki. That seems to be ludicrous to assume that this might be ahead, but we see that the Ukrainians increase the pressure along the Dnipro River and slowly creep closer to a point where it might be a serious threat that they start a river crossing operation with mechanized forces as well. But as said, we are still somewhat away from this. Generally, about the general situation, we don't have much change in the control of the front line. But Denis Prokopenko, who is the commander for the Azov regiment, who was captured in Mariupol, then exchanged and had to be interned in Turkey, where Turkey gave him to the Ukrainians. He has now returned to his troops and taken command of Azov again. So he's back on the front lines fighting again. We also have an article by Forbes, and it's talking that all Ukrainian Marine brigades, all 4 of them, are in a 10-mile frontline sector in the Mokry Yali River. The Mokry Yali River is river valley is this here at Staromayorsk. So according to Forbes, all 4 naval infantry brigades are fighting here, roughly 8,000 men in just a 10-mile wide area. They are being considered to be among the most elite forces in the Ukrainian armed forces, which should give the Ukrainians hope to achieve something there, but it also shows that the Ukrainians are pushing more and more of their reserves into the front lines. We've seen that close to Orikhiv, where the 10th Corps has been committed now. It clearly shows that Ukrainians are sending the second echelon in to make sure that their offensive is not reaching its culmination point, which otherwise would close in, and where we, at least for now, get the impression that we are closing in on the culmination here, close to Bakhmut. At least it sometimes looks as it. We'll still have to observe it. I usually, in the past, I always said that Bakhmut, while the Ukrainians will likely love to capture Bakhmut, the main goal there should not be the capture of Bakhmut, but to draw in as many Russian reserves as possible, to fix as many Russian troops there as possible, through the political importance of Bakhmut, and this at least should be very well achieved. So even if the Ukrainians don't advance much further, as long as they are able to keep up the pressure on Bakhmut, force the Russians to keep their troops there that then can't get involved anywhere else, it's probably still a success at least to a limited degree. We have news from the nuclear power plant as well. The observers of the IAEA, I don't even know what the acronym is, like the International Atomic Energy Organization, they were now granted access to 2 of the roofs of the nuclear reactors where the Ukrainians had said that the Russians placed explosives. They didn't find any, but it has to be said that they were not allowed to go to the roofs for weeks, for several weeks in a row. So probably there was enough time for the Russians to remove any explosives, if there ever were any. In the past, I already voiced doubt because to me it didn't make much sense for the Russians to blow up the roof of a nuclear reactor. It would not have breached the containment. Ukrainians said they placed explosives there to blow it up and then make the impression that the Ukrainians shelled the nuclear power plant. I guess that would make some kind of sense, but as we know by now, so far there has not been an explosion on the roof of the reactors, and at least on those 2 where they were allowed. No idea why they weren't allowed on the other 4 reactors, but on those 2 they didn't find explosives. We have news from the Crimea. Not only has the ship there been hit, what was the name? The SIG. We also have now, by the Ukrainians, they've said that from August 23 on, this is a war risk area. Basically, every Russian harbor here along the coastline will now be war risk area, both the harbors as well as its approaches. This means that any civilian ship is basically driving there on its own risk. Ukraine is obviously reacting to that in this way, to the Russian blockade of Ukraine's grain shipments, to the destruction of the harbor facilities, and by announcing this after an oil tanker has been hit in open waters, this will be highly effective. Civilian ships of independent nations, of neutral nations, will very likely no longer dare going in there, even with escorts, as we've seen that the escorts are far from 100% sure to achieve defeat. We've seen it with the LST from yesterday that was hit. It's a military ship with soldiers on board, with weapons on board to defeat naval drones, and still they were incapable of doing so. That we see neutral nations sending their ships there to pick up Russian oil, to pick up Russian grain shipments, seems extremely unlikely. The only ships that will continue doing so will likely be Russian government-owned ships, maybe Russian private ships that are coerced to do this because the insurance rates would skyrocket. Obviously, the Russian Navy will try to give them escort, but this will hurt. This should at least hurt Russia massively once the Ukrainians have shown that they mean it, that they are serious, and the attack on the oil tanker 6 should have been a sign in this regard. We have also reports about a drone attack being defeated on Theodosia. The Russians said they defeated all the drones, and it seems they defeated them again, like they defeated the naval attack drones in regards to the LST. They might have defeated them by putting a building in their way. At least the videos here implicate this. There's also reports that the factory where Iskanders are reported, there's been an explosion. Initially, there was a claim that it might have been a drone attack. By now, it's said that the explosion was internal. Obviously, we have no clue yet, at least about the damage. We have no clue what caused it. Some will claim it was a sabotage, but we also should acknowledge that Russia is trying to ramp up production, longer shifts, new personnel to increase production, which has less experience while working with explosives, so it's well within the realm of possibility that we are just facing an accident here because of inexperienced or overworked staff. There's the peace conference now happening in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. Ukraine is invited, but and China is also in place. Generally, more than for members, delegations from more than 30 countries are expected. Among them, Ukraine, United States, European Union, China, Indonesia, Egypt, and Turkey. But Russia is not participating. Ukraine is demanding basically the return to the rule of law, so not the rule of the power, the rule of the sword, basically, whoever might is right. Ukraine wants to move away from this, so they will ask for the return of their borders of 1991, so including Crimea. Obviously, Russia will never accept this, so that this conference will lead to any peace conference to the conclusion of peace seems impossible. But what Ukraine will likely attempt to do there, together with its allies, to get neutral nations on board in a regards that, hey, Ukraine is willing to make some concessions, so Russia move in their way, that Ukraine will give up Crimea seems impossible. But the goal will likely be to increase pressure on Russia to end the war by pulling in neutral nations into the realm, onto the side of Ukraine, by demonstrating from Ukraine's side that they're willing to make compromises where compromises are possible, and in territorial questions there aren't. So I guess in my interpretation, this is meant to increase pressure on Russia. That China is participating is thus very important, while Russia isn't there. As said, no real conclusion will be seen, but it increases the pressure on Russia. And we have another message, another news part from China that actually complements this and might be a sign that China is growing impatient and wants to put pressure on Russia to end the war. But before this, we go there, we continue with some more news from the political sphere. Alexander Navalny, the Russian opposition figure, has been sentenced to an additional 19 years in prison. He has been sentenced to special regime with the harshest prison conditions. So regarding his age and the prison conditions, he'll probably not going to leave the prison alive unless he's being released earlier. They accuse him in 6 cases to incite extremism and finance it. Supposedly he created an illegal NGO and he has rehabilitated Nazism and has incited children to dangerous acts. That's what he has been sentenced for. Navalny is the most prominent Russian opposition figure, and he was already in prison, already sentenced to, I think, over 10 years. So this should likely mean that unless he's being released earlier, unless he's exchanged in some way, he's not going to leave prison alive again. We have news here from the Duma, and according to this, Andrei Kartapolov, who is the speaker for the Duma, from my understanding, has said that they are going to talk about introducing a law, or going to process with the introduction of law that would punish avoiding conscription with up to 5 years in prison. Another sign that while the age range has been increased for both conscription and for reserves, now they're making it harder in every way. Russia is preparing for a long war, and Russia is preparing to draw in a lot more soldiers in the future. Here we have another example showing this. We have news from Belarus as well. Hayun Project is an opposition media for Belarusia, and according to them, security forces were awaiting the pilots for the helicopters when they returned. So this would be an indication that they did something that they were not meant to do while Belarusia was trying to act tough. This is a sign that should be understood that it wasn't an intended provocation by the Belarusians that the helicopters crossed the border into Poland. And we have news here that, according to this, that journalists have found with the serial numbers that some of the missiles that are hitting Ukraine are actually Ukrainian missiles that have been given to Russia in 1999. Among them KH-55 and probably some KH-22 as well. They are being used now against Ukraine, and we see the results of politicians not thinking long term in this regard, as we have Ukrainian missiles being handed over to a future enemy and now killing Ukrainian personnel and civilians alike. And this is the bigger news we have here. This is the Global Times. It's a Chinese propaganda medium. And they are saying China imposes export controls on certain UAVs to safeguard national security interests. Curbs take effect on September the 1st. Russian military bloggers are panicking. This will decrease their ability to supply their forces. And we see the restrictions here, unmanned or airship alike, if they have a takeoff weight of over 7 kilos or an empty weight of over 4 kilos. So anything bigger that can probably be used in a military sense. Also, if they have an endurance of over 30 minutes, or if they can fly beyond the operator's visual line of sight. Russia is using them. Ukraine is also using them. So this will hurt Ukraine as well. But to restrict this now, while attending a peace conference, seems to be an attempt to signal Russia, at least in my interpretation, to start moving, as the talk is about dual use here, that Russia's military capabilities are by now massively dependent on components delivered from China, and the Chinese drones are omnipresent on the front line, where Russia now holds the superiority in drones, even according to the Ukrainians. So if the Chinese refuse to deliver them from now on or restrict them, this will cause problems for Russia. China at the same time attending a conference where likely the outcome will be a suggested peace that is far away from Russia's demands, which still demands all 5 oblasts that it has annexed. This is unacceptable to most nations, to accept that Russia has moved borders with military force. Both of the things combined seems to me that China is increasing its pressure on Russia to start moving into to move away from its war goals. We have international support as well. Lithuania is sending NASAMS, air defense systems, to Ukraine. Lithuania now continuing to push weaponry in big amounts to Ukraine, especially regarding their own GDP. We have a message here from Rheinmetall, the German defense company, that they have sent Recon systems, the Surveil Spire. This is a recon system that is fully automatic for fully automatic surveillance with cameras and sensors on a long mast. They are communicating with 4G and Starlink with their base stations, and it has solar power, so it's completely independent from outside electricity sources, and will be able to alert its users on any movement, any change there. So obviously helping the Ukrainians to reduce force needs to surveil certain areas of the front line or of the border with Russia in this regard. We also have message from Germany here in the Rheinmetall in Unterlüß. At their factory there, the production has started for 35mm grenades for the Gepard self-propelled anti-air systems. Ukraine is massively relying on them to especially take out Shahid drones. We've talked in the past that Russia will likely have a lot more very soon as the factories in Tatarstan and the Belarusian factory in Gomel are starting to produce. The Gepard is an essential tool against them, and obviously it needs ammunition for this, and Rheinmetall is making sure that from now on ammunition won't be a big problem anymore. We also have news here from Politico that actually it's a huge problem with the Ukrainian pilots. They found 8 pilots that can start training, only 8 that are fluent in English and ready to begin training, and another 20 are potential, but they first need to learn English well enough. That Ukraine is still having that issue after this time. Obviously, the constraints of combat are understandable, but maybe they should have put the Ukrainian government should have put some effort into finding and training pilots, teaching them English in the past 1.5 years outside of work. I know it seems a little mean to ask them for this when they sometimes fly 2 combat missions a day, but this is going to be a problem if they don't have the language knowledge to learn and to operate the plane they were asking for so long. This is clearly a deficiency that the Ukrainian Air Force overlooked. We also have a message of Turkish Clustermonition now having appeared in this regard. So Turkey also delivered cluster munition to the Ukrainians, and the British are likely to give the Ukrainians a new SAM system. This is the ASRAM infrared guided anti-air, air-to-air missile. So it's meant for use on planes. This time it's launched from the ground. In the air, it's going to have 25-kilometer range, obviously because of altitude, thinner air resistance, the speed of the plane. All of this adds up to give it 25-kilometer range. From the ground, it will be much shorter, but it's at least it's quite possible that these missiles, which are mobile, as we can see, will be good enough to strike Kamo 52 helicopters that are roughly 10 to 12 kilometers away when they launch their Vichir anti-ATGMs. This will be an air defense system that is likely capable of countering them, as it has the necessary range, and at the same time it's mobile, so this is very likely what the Ukrainians really, really need. And we have finally one image here. There's always talking about the cope cage, meant obviously as a meme, as a joke, to mock the Russians for trying to cope with the situation. And as we can see here, this T-55, it actually worked. This seems to be a warhead. I'm not completely sure if this is, to me it looks like RPG-7, but I'm not completely sure. It's obviously from an anti-tank launcher, likely hit here with a drone, attached to a drone or something like this. But in this regard, the cope cage actually worked. That's it from me for now. If you like the situation report, please hit a thumbs up. That really helps with the algorithm. Leave your comment in the comment section. What do you think about the peace initiative, if it will lead to anything, or if you think that China will continue to support Russia and I misinterpret the ban of the export of drones, which is quite possible that I do. Leave a comment for this. This is also engaging and really helpful with the algorithm. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. That's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.